When we look at the attack on healthcare, we see that it has effect over space and time that is different from bombs. When you destroy a hospital, it doesn't only affect the patients and the staff members in the hospital, it affects entire communities that depend on that hospital to survive. And that's a very effective tool of cleansing entire areas.
You're listening to This Authoritarian Life, a podcast in which we explore everyday human stories to make sense of authoritarian politics. My name is Kristóf Szombati.
And I'm Erdem Evren.
Okay, so welcome back to This Authoritarian Life. It's been quite some time. We have been absent for 6 months, I think. We had a lot to do and we needed some money, which we luckily managed to find with Erdem, right? So we're continuing with another season. And this season we had a long discussion and we thought we would organize it around the concept or the idea of the front line. And what we basically mean by that are, the sites where authoritarian power is being asserted and contested. And the overall goal is to talk to people on the ground who are not only facing, but actively trying to work against an authoritarian dynamic and learn from them. By that, we mean seeing events with their eyes to get a sense of the challenges and the dilemmas they face, learning from their various efforts to make authoritarian leaders accountable, to slow down the repressive machinery of the state, or to defend oppressed populations, safeguard spaces of artistic creation and freedom, and of course also to build democratic and egalitarian movements and futures. And this first episode of the season was really prompted by a coincidence, namely the fact that both our podcast and Guy Shalev, who is here with us today, received a small award called the New Directions Award from the American Anthropological Association. This is a prize that is handed out to recognize efforts to make anthropology and anthropological knowledge kind of accessible to a broader audience. So we'd like to congratulate you on the reception of this award. I would also congratulate ourselves a bit, saying that we're very happy to have been awarded this small prize. And let me immediately introduce Guy. So Guy Shalev is a medical and political anthropologist and the executive director of Physicians for Human Rights Israel. We'll call that PHRI in the show. He earned his PhD in cultural and medical anthropology from the University of North Carolina. And under his leadership, PHRI has worked to defend the right to health for Palestinians, documenting the medical consequences of both the occupation and the genocide, so occupation in the West Bank and genocide in Gaza, a mission that has obviously taken on ever greater urgency since October the 7th. And before Erdem talks about the show itself, I also just want to briefly state that we're recording this episode 4 days after the ceasefire, the latest ceasefire has gone into effect. So we are on the 14th of October. 20 hostages have been released. Bodies of more are coming home to Israel. 2,000 Palestinian prisoners who had been held in for longer or shorter times in Israeli prisons were also released. So this is a moment of expectation, trepidation, joy, and many other complicated feelings. Probably we'll talk also about this, but I'll let Erdem talk more about how we're going to structure this episode.
First of all, Guy's work and activism are especially relevant for us to address different aspects of the genocide in Gaza and the occupation of the West Bank. And in addition to the elimination, torture, maiming of hundreds and thousands of Palestinian bodies by the IDF and the Israeli settlers, we would also like to talk about something that we would call politics of life and death. So both before and after October 7, Israel has been manipulating and decimating the infrastructures necessary for the sustenance and reproduction of Palestinian life. There are many, many examples, like the hampering of access to medical care through the restriction of movement and tightly controlled exit permits for patients, for example, or the starvation through the calculation of minimal calories, the arrest and killing of Palestinian medics, withholding of medical treatment from so-called terrorists, and obviously the destruction of hospitals and medical facilities. All this also raises the complicity of Israeli medics and medical institutions in the weaponization of medicine, an issue which Guy has repeatedly highlighted in his public interventions.
So basically, Guy's work and everything that we're going to be talking about in relation to Israel, Gaza, and the West Bank brings up this issue of war in the current kind of geopolitical environment, and how more particularly authoritarian leaders and leaders pursuing or pushing war machines are using medicine or implementing medicine as a front line. To start, I guess I would just ask Guy, so why did you start doing research on the professional and political lives of Palestinian physicians in Israel?
So thank you for inviting me. This is really exciting, both getting the award and to get to know you as co-awardees. So congratulations. So I think what was my motivation is to try to understand how Palestinian and Jewish Israeli citizens of Israel work side by side in the same institutions in conditions that are allegedly good, right? A lot of work has been done on Palestinians in checkpoints, Palestinians in kind of blue collar jobs, serving Israeli society in many ways. And then there's also always the medical sphere, which is considered this neutral area where Palestinians and Israelis work shoulder to shoulder. Everyone are equal. Everyone are accepted as they are. And then the numbers kind of sort of prove it, because you see so many Palestinians making the decision of studying medicine, going into this profession. And 20% of doctors in Israel are Palestinian citizens. 50% of new doctors in Israel are Palestinian citizens. So basically, the future of medicine in Israel is Palestinian. And then this is always kind of described as this lighthouse of peace, of coexistence. And I wanted to see how this lighthouse looks like. What happens really when people work together in this context, with the ethos of medical neutrality that allegedly allows everyone, whoever they are, to come to this profession and care for people, but also in a reality of apartheid, where Palestinian citizens of Israel are subordinated to the Jewish supremacist Zionist state of Israel. And how does that play out? So that was kind of my motivation, I would say.
And maybe we should also stress that you're an anthropologist and you conducted ethnographic research. So can you tell us about where did you undertake your participant observation, and also what are kind of the findings of this research?
And maybe first I should acknowledge that I'm a Jewish Israeli person. So it was much easier for me. I couldn't even imagine a Palestinian doing this research in terms of getting access to hospitals. My research was scrutinized by ethics committees as if doing research with Palestinians is something unethical. I was required to change the title of my research in my applications to the ethics committees, that my research is with Arabs and not with Palestinians. So that was, I guess, considered unethical to even imply that they are Palestinians. And I was indeed blocked from doing research in one hospital, but was then allowed to do in two other hospitals in the center of Israel. So I was doing field work for 3 to 4 months in each hospital, and also conducted in-depth interviews with more than 100 interviewees, doctors, medical students, both Palestinians and Israelis, mostly Palestinians. So that's what my research looked like. And in terms of my findings, so I was really looking at how this ethos of medical neutrality works, how it applies in the field. And then what I kind of saw in different ways, in different contexts, is how this ideal is being applied selectively on Jewish Israelis and on Palestinians living in and working in the same system. So people would work together. For our listeners who don't really know how a doctor's day looks like, this is a very difficult job. You arrive very early in the morning. You're all day running around the hospital. It's a very intense profession in terms of even physically. Just my back really hurts after doing field work in a hospital. So, and that experience of working together is very powerful. But then you see that they basically live in very different realities. Jewish Israelis can get into political discussions. Jewish Israelis can talk about the kind of vacations in a specific way, about going to a demonstration. There's no problem with that. The rules of medical neutrality do not apply in that respect. But a Palestinian cannot be a Palestinian. Basically, a Palestinian needs to check their Palestinianness at the door. If there is a political argument, it's not even a political argument. It's just an argument or a discussion about the reality in which people live here. Then Palestinian colleagues would just shut up. I know that because I was there, and then I would interview and talk to the people, and I said, "Why didn't you say what you just told me in that context where you were participating in the conversation?" And they said, "Of course, I cannot say something like that. If a Palestinian somehow criticizes Israeli policies, whether in the West Bank and Gaza or even inside Israel, it is immediately considered, oh, wow, you're getting political. And this is something that's not supposed to happen here in the hospital." So in different mechanisms of how to mark these borders of what a Palestinian can say and what a Palestinian can do. Yeah, I was trying to kind of see these borders from different directions and how they apply on the ground.
And this was the middle of the 2010s, right? Or when was this research conducted?
From 2014 until 2020, 21. Yeah.
And so how did you come into contact with what's happening then in the West Bank? Because this research that you just explained to us mostly focused on Israel itself, as far as I understand, and also Palestinians who are citizens of Israel and living on Israeli territory.
Not as part of my research. I mean, that started with my work with Physicians for Human Rights Israel, with PHRI. My research was only on Palestinian citizens of Israel, of 48 Palestinians. This was my interest. Again, looking at a situation where people have the same allegedly civil rights and the same profession, the same paycheck, everything is the same, but still everything is very much different. So yeah, I only got to know and learn more about health in the occupied territory, where people are not citizens, that are subjects of Israeli occupation, when I started getting involved in PHRI.
So how did you get involved in this organization?
So I started by volunteering. I mean, my work was in the medical sphere, and I felt like I want to also do something. As anthropologists, we sometimes feel like we only take, we never give back. So I was looking for an opportunity to volunteer in the field, basically, in the field of generally saying the politics of health or health and politics. So I started volunteering in PHRI's clinic in Jaffa, in Tel Aviv. There's a clinic for asylum seekers, statusless people living without medical insurance. And basically, I started that in 2014 and continued doing it until I became the director in 2022. It was very important for me to be part of this clinic for many years. Whatever I did, I was later on the ethics committee of PHRI and then on the board of directors of the organization. I was then the chairperson of the board, and then made the decision to apply for the director's role. But throughout that time, I was just in the clinic, accepting patients, opening files, getting their referrals. That was something that I found very grounding and important in terms of being in close connection to the act of care in this reality that really denies care for people.
So what's the organization's mission, and what kind of work did you do when you became the director?
So the organization was founded in 1988. It was founded by Israeli and Palestinian doctors who wanted to address health inequalities between Israelis and Palestinians in a way that is co-resistance to the occupation. So not just kind of providing care for Palestinians who are denied care, but also working together as doctors to resist the occupation. In fact, you could say it was founded in Shifa Hospital in Gaza. That was one of the first activities that these doctors did. They went to Shifa Hospital, the major, most important hospital in Gaza, to see the conditions in the hospital, the just unimaginable disparities between a hospital in Israel and a hospital in Gaza. It was the days of the first Intifada, the first uprising of the popular uprising of Palestinians against the occupation. And ever since, this is a major part of our kind of work, providing direct care and aid to people, being in this very intimate relation with people that is being created around care, while at the same time documenting human rights violations and advocating for a political change in order to change the structures that really we need to attend to as care givers. So we have a clinic in Jaffa for asylum seekers and statusless people. We have a clinic in the West Bank, a mobile clinic that goes twice a week to 2 different communities a week, with usually between 10 and 15 doctors to like we see 600-700 patients in such a day in a community, provide medications, then refer people to experts in cases that need that. Until October 7, we dispatched delegations, medical delegations going into Gaza, more than 100 delegations since the blockade started in 2007. And our last delegation was supposed to leave on October 12th, and of course it was cancelled. So that's our kind of direct aid humanitarian wing of the organization. And then we have 4 research departments, research and advocacy departments. One deals with asylum seekers and statusless people and disparities in health in that context. The other is on inequalities within Israeli society or between different residents in Israel. They have medical insurance, but still there are inequalities between center and periphery, between Palestinian citizens and Jewish Israelis, disparities related to LGBTQ health, to women's health. So that's this department. And then we have a department dealing with detainees and prisoners in Israeli incarceration facilities. We can talk more about that because this became a major issue during the genocide. It was also a major issue before, but of course, everything got worse in the past 2 years. And a department that deals with the occupied Palestinian territory, the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, documenting violations, mainly international advocacy, because there's really no one to talk to here in Israel in that topic. To the topic of our conversation today, health is being weaponized since 1948, definitely. It didn't begin with the occupation of 1967, but definitely since the occupation of 1967 and limitation of movement that was put in place on Palestinians in the occupied territory. So the development of the Palestinian healthcare system for many years until the Oslo Accords, which were signed in the mid 90s, and then responsibilities, some civilian responsibilities were transferred to the Palestinian Authority, an allegedly independent self-governance mechanism of Palestinians, which was never really the case. But it was actually, in many cases, in many ways, you can look at that as just Israel getting rid of its obligation to care for the health of Palestinians. So until then, Israel was in charge on the health system serving Palestinians. Definitely not developed, not even close to what the Israeli system looked like in those years. But it was a system. It was a system that doctors and other medical workers, Palestinian, worked in it. There was movement between Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem. It was all under the occupation of the Israeli government. And then what we started to see since the first Intifada and then the Oslo Accords, and then definitely the second Intifada, the second Intifada is around the early 2000s, and then we can get to when Hamas took control over Gaza, and then the blockade of Gaza. That's the kind of closer context we see to the genocide in Gaza, a blockade of 16 years before the genocide began. So then these territories were totally separated from each other, a system that was definitely lacking, but it was meant to serve the entire Palestinian population. So some treatments were available in Gaza, some treatments were available in the West Bank or East Jerusalem, and then people could get referrals. Just for our listeners who we need to take a look at the map, this is all very, very close. It's just 1 hour away from Gaza to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is part of the West Bank. These are not in any way distances. So the whole idea was this one system that's serving everyone. But since these territories were totally cut off from each other, and Gaza definitely, once it was put under blockade, that more than 2 million people living in Gaza basically lost access to a lot of the treatments available in the other parts of Palestine. And then what was put in place is this absurd permit regime that Israel enforced on the people of Gaza. Everyone leaving Gaza had to get a permit, people accompanying patients, doctors or other medical workers needing training or going to do fellowships or just studying. All that was cut off, and then the entire system was. The result is just people couldn't get the permit. So more than 30%, for example, of children in 2021, it was 32% of applications for children to get a permit to get treatment outside of Gaza were denied. So third of the children could not get the treatment they needed outside of Gaza, and then 35% of accompanying family members couldn't get the permit to accompany their children if they had to go to treatment outside of Gaza. We worked as PHRI on that topic for many years, trying to petition the High Court for every case that was denied. And the absurd is that most cases that we interfered, the permit was given. So in more than 60% of the cases that we interfered, so the 60% out of the 30% who got denied, we could get the permit eventually, which means that there was probably no security reason. It was just that they needed someone else to take a look on that and put pressure on that permit in order to be given. And in many cases, because accompanying family members could not get the treatment, we had children, even as young as 2, 3, or 4-year-old children being hospitalized in East Jerusalem, for example, without a parent. Just imagining sending your 4-year-old to go through cancer treatment somewhere else without being able to be next to them. Sometimes it was an aunt, sometimes it was a grandma, sometimes it was a neighbor. Just that someone will take care of that kid while they were getting treatment in East Jerusalem. And I might say this is important. Only 4% of referrals from Gaza were given to hospitals in Israel. Israel was using that in propaganda all over the world, saying we are caring for Gazan children. We are allowing Gazans to be hospitalized in our hospitals, providing them care. This is the fringe of the fringe. More than 60% of referrals were to the West Bank and East Jerusalem. So it was Palestinians caring for Palestinians, denied access to do so by the Israeli occupation permit regime.
From what you said, what that implies is that the healthcare system was somewhat more developed in the West Bank than it was in Gaza, but was it also de-developed there, as you said, or what happened?
Right. Definitely it was de-developed, but it was better than Gaza. Gaza, under blockade, was a system that was, we have to acknowledge the just courage of the doctors and the medical workers of that system for so many years, working with just 40 to 50% of medications were in stock in Gaza before October 7th. So people had to live with just no medications available. And we used to send our delegations there with gloves, with needles, because otherwise they could not perform surgery. So Gaza was definitely in a much worse condition. The West Bank was in better condition. In the West Bank, there are also some private institutions, private hospitals, but also de-developed. And the reality in terms of the West Bank and access to health is also, of course, very problematic. The best hospitals in terms of their ability to develop, their ability to access medication, access funds, are the ones in East Jerusalem, because Israel annexed East Jerusalem. So these hospitals, for example, they have an Israeli bank account. So all kind of limitations on hospitals in the West Bank don't apply to them. So they can purchase, they can get grants from the EU, they can work much better. And indeed, two of the most important hospitals in Palestine, Makased and Augusta Victoria, two hospitals in East Jerusalem, that they also carry the bulk of the weight of caring for Gazans and for hundreds of patients every year to each of these hospitals. In fact, they still have the medical files of a lot of the people that we are now pleading to get out of Gaza because they need their treatments. They're already patients of these hospitals in Jerusalem. But Israel is not allowing, it did not allow even one patient to leave from Gaza to the West Bank and East Jerusalem in the past 2 years.
How do you read this de-development policy? I think you suggested that you use the word offloading, so kind of get rid of a burden that Israel no longer wanted to carry. Is that your interpretation of this longer historical process of kind of de-developing healthcare and in these, I mean, mostly then in Gaza and in the West Bank?
I think maybe before October 7, I would say it's just disregard for Palestinian lives that is leading these policies. They just didn't care. They can just find their own solutions, get the funds, do whatever they want, care for themselves. It's not our problem as Israel, which is definitely not true according to international law and not according to Israel's obligation. And the ICJ just ruled that very clearly that the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territory is illegal, and Israel needs to stop that occupation and needs to provide care for these people. But I think it's hard to see the genocide in Gaza since October 7 and not see these policies just creating conditions of life that are impossible for Palestinians to survive, both in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, in many ways inside Israel in 1948 Palestine.
And I think I would have a question in regards to your efforts to advocate and push for these rights of Palestinians in the occupied territories to be respected. So what was your experience with that before October 7, before we come to Gaza? Were there sections of the Israeli society that you were able to build alliances with, mobilize? How was it within the medical community?
Okay, so in regards to health of Palestinians in the OPT, the occupied Palestinian territory, we saw that if we put pressure on international pressure a lot, that can have effect, but that effect is also short-lived. So we could, for example, deal with long-term permits, right? Like, as I said, these are very critical for many people. And then if we put a lot of pressure on that, get international media on the topic, get diplomats, get politicians to address the Israeli government, talk about long-term permits, then we could see some effect, some kind of easing of processes, allowing permits for long-term treatment needs. The same with getting accompanying family members to children. If we put a lot of pressure on that, a campaign on that, we could see some results. But then it will all just scale back, and that's it was so depressing to see that our work we feel like has no effect. It affects the individuals that we are getting out of Gaza, maybe, or in other cases, but it doesn't change the system. The system is just totally in its own course of denying health from Palestinians. And then we also work within Israeli society. We consider ourselves, we are an organization of medical workers. Our staff is comprised of professional human rights workers. We are 40 people in the staff, but we have hundreds of volunteers, doctors and other medical workers. And we see ourselves as part of the medical community. That's why we put a lot of emphasis on communicating with this community and trying to get them on our side, on the right side of caring for the right to health of Palestinians. And we also do that because we see that as effective. Doctors, they are respected in society. They are organized in the Israeli Medical Association, a very strong organization that represents 95% of doctors in Israel. If the IMA strikes for 1 hour, then the whole country is at unease, let's say that. And if we are always trying to get them to act, get them to voice resistance to this attack on the profession, this attack on Palestinians' health, we always claim and argue and talk to our medical doctors, colleagues, it's an attack on the profession and the very basic idea of care and how this is supposed to be universal and for everyone with no kind of differentiations. And then we get some doctors. We have, of course, our own community, the doctors that volunteer with us, that write letters for us, that read our reports and comment on them. That's our amazing community of medical workers. And we in many cases managed, I'm saying that in past tense, unfortunately, managed to get more and more kind of coalitions within the medical community, the broader medical community, to join our efforts. For example, in Israel, most, and I'm saying most, is more than 90% of detainees are hospitalized in civilian hospitals in Israel, shackled with one arm and one leg to the bed. This is against all ethical guidelines. People, when they are hospitalized and they're getting care, they need to be in conditions that allows them to receive care and to feel better and recover. And then we got doctors from many hospitals in Israel to report to us when they see a detainee that is shackled to the bed. We got these groups in different WhatsApp groups in different hospitals, and we could get them involved. We could get them to pressure the management, and we saw a difference. We saw that less people are getting shackled. We saw that this is something that concerns the IMA, the Israeli Medical Association, concerns the administration of hospitals. And then October 7 came in.
Could we summarize that as there was somewhat of a positive trend in relation to the effects of your work that was broken by this shattering event?
I think there was some positive direction, definitely in terms of shackling of detainees, but also in other aspects. There was, before October 7 began, if someone of our listeners are following Israeli politics, there was a long time of first elections that kind of again and again, 5 elections in 1 year. And then we had a long time of protests against the government, the most right-wing government ever to be elected in Israel, and what is defined as the judicial overhaul. And then many more doctors, but not only doctors, of course, from the center and center left of Israeli politics, they're all Zionists and they basically don't care much about Palestinians. It then was made clear during the demonstration, but also definitely after October 7. But we saw that we are getting closer to them there. We saw that we can get them, recruit them to be more active in the medical field and in other areas as part of their resistance to the government from their own different angle. But it was definitely a moment where we felt we're getting more of the community involved and more attentive to our messages.
That's interesting. So this kind of coalition against the right gave you cover or gave you some standing in society. That's how I read what your comments. But
basically they saw us on the same side as they are, which is something that they hardly saw before, and they of course didn't see after October 7. But in that moment in time, they saw we are all together against the government. My parents, who are I love them. They're my parents, but they're Jewish Israeli Zionists. They support Israeli policies for many years. They went to the street. That's the first time I've seen my parents. They are 70-year-old go to the streets in protests. It was the first time in my life. I'm now 43 that both me and my parents were protesting against the government. I mean, it was a moment where a broader coalition saw themselves together as struggling against the right-wing government. And then October 7 happened, and of course, the whole frame, the whole understanding of politics and lines and borders within these politics changed significantly.
So, what were the effects, reverberations of October 7 on your activities and on the medical profession in general?
For Israelis, history started in October 7 in many ways, which is not a narrative that I would want to accept, but we definitely need to acknowledge that this is the way big parts of Israeli society experienced them today and whatever happened post that day. The first time we had, it was clear that we are seeing this reality, this new reality that is happening in front of our eyes, and this event, this very traumatic and tragic event of October 7, differently from the most part of Israeli society, is when we insisted that it didn't come from nowhere. So we issued a statement already on Monday. The October 7 was a Saturday, and we in that statement we addressed the context. So we said that this is very tragic, and we are so many violations of human rights and lives being compromised. But also, these are people who are living under occupation. So we were saying that this didn't come from nowhere. People were refugees living under occupation with no hope, no basic conditions of life, and October 7 is part of that context. So that moment we got a lot of backlash on that. Just we actually said clearly this is not excusing in any way this attack, but this is important. We understand that in its context, and we got a lot of hate and attacks on that. And then we immediately issued another statement, I think it was 2 days later, calling for an immediate stop of the fire on Gaza. And it seems obvious that a human rights organization will call for the end of a military attack on civilians. But that was very much not accepted in Israeli society at that moment. The idea was that this attack is justified. October 7 was horrible and needs to be retaliated. And then we were basically the only human rights organization who has done so and called for the stop of the attack immediately once it started. So this was a break. We've seen a lot of our volunteers emailing us, we're not going to volunteer with you anymore. We got just barrages of hate mail and messages all over in every platform. So I think for us, it was clear that we are in a different moment now where we are working in a very, very fringe of society. It's our role to try to get our way back and try to convince people, because we see part of our job is to talk to the Israeli public. We publish everything we write in both English, Hebrew, and Arabic, because we want to convince people that what we're saying is the right thing. Our communication with Jewish Israelis is very important to us. But it was very clear that we are now in a very different position of that communication with them. Yeah, in terms of our work, we immediately dispatched a mobile clinic to the Dead Sea, where the survivors of the October 7 massacre were housed in hotels. So we put a clinic in David Hotel in the Dead Sea, where the survivors of the Kibbutz Be'eri attack they were there. Of course, the Israeli Ministry of Health or the Israeli government has done nothing to send over any medical aid to these people. The Dead Sea is, I wouldn't say dead, but it's a place where there are hotels because people go there on vacation, but there's no city, there aren't any facilities, there's no hospital there. So they just immediately evacuated thousands of people to these hotels without people that are in very bad conditions, both mentally and physically, without providing them anything. So we immediately dispatched a mobile clinic there. In fact, our chairperson, Dr. Lina Qasem Hassan, went there on this. She's a Palestinian doctor. She went there that day with the medications she already collected, because she was supposed to go to the delegations going into Gaza a few days later. So it's the same medications we wanted to distribute in Gaza that were then we distributed with the Israelis in that context. And ever since then, we're working in emergency mode day and night in communication with our colleagues from the Gazan healthcare system, people we worked with for so many years. A lot of them now are dead, detained, collecting the information on attacks on hospitals and healthcare facilities, doing a lot of advocacy, doing a lot of work with Palestinian detainees. You mentioned before that just now 2,000 detainees were released, while Israeli hostages were, first of all, they are called hostages, but many of the Palestinians are hostages the same way. They were kidnapped from Gaza for no reason, not even charged with anything. They're just held in Israeli facilities in conditions of torture. So 9,000 more are still held after this deal. 9,000 more Palestinians are still held in Israeli facilities. So this, of course, deal is not the end of this tragedy. Yeah, I can speak more about this.
Yeah, let's get a bit into that. I guess the first question, is it correct to assume that there was no way in which you could practically support your former colleagues in Gaza, right, after October 7?
Yeah. So I think this is something that was really dawned on us very early, because we, as a Jewish Israeli, our whole education system is built on Holocaust studies, basically. All history is Holocaust, and what leads to the Holocaust and what follows the Holocaust. And we grew up to kind of not even understand how can an entire society be recruited to such an atrocity, and whether by being silent or by participating in that. And we got a very vivid example of how that happens. And part of that is getting the Israeli society to support the genocide for so long, and in numbers. More than 80% of Jewish Israelis supported the attack on Gaza until the very end. And part of that is, I cannot know what was deliberate policies or what happened in practice, but for example, any connection between Israelis and Gaza was totally cut off. So we, as an organization registered in Israel, we could not send medications. We could not send our doctors in. We could not send field researchers to do the work there. Total disconnect to the point where we now have 3 different cases against Israeli banks, but the bank denies us to use our own funds in our own bank account to purchase medications in Greece, for example, and send them through Rafah when Rafah was still open to Gaza. But so yeah, we could not directly support our colleagues. That's part of it's really heartbreaking, especially Salah Hajihi, the director of our mobile clinic, our staff member that was leading the delegations going in, knowing these people personally, their families. We were the only Israel-based organization going into Gaza since the blockade. So he knows Gaza and the people very closely, but we could not do anything to support our friends and colleagues there. Still is very heartbreaking.
Could we talk about the destruction? Because I know it's been talked a lot, but maybe there are aspects of that are not known to the wider public. So I'd leave it up to you to tell us what you think is important to know that our audience may not have heard of.
Maybe I'll just give a quick overview, because a lot of our audience, I guess, they've read the news, they've seen the videos, they've seen doctors operating in the dark with the cell phone camera light on. But in our report on why this attack on Gaza constitutes a genocide, we focus on this attack on healthcare. And according to the Genocide Convention, there are different articles. And there's Article 2A that deals with killing, the actual killing. Article 2B that deals with injuring, both mental and physical injuries. And Article 2C deals with creating conditions of life that cannot allow a people to survive. And this is what we see very clearly with the attack on healthcare. And we see this attack in 5 different major ways. One is attacking facilities, attacking hospitals, attacking hygiene facilities, wash facilities, sewage, water. But the attack on hospitals in particular, 33 of the 36 hospitals in Gaza were attacked, raided. Many of them raided more than once. Some of them were razed to the ground. The Turkish hospital, the Turkish cancer hospital, the only cancer hospital in Gaza, was bombed, raided, used as a military base for the Israeli military while in Gaza, and then razed to the ground with bulldozers. Kamal Adwan, the hospital that is serving the north side of Gaza, was raided, burned. Some of the wings got burned and could not operate anymore. Shifa, the most important hospital, was raided at least twice with complete raids of the hospital. I can speak more of what a raid looks like, because, for example, when the Israeli military raided Shifa, they put the patients and staff members that were there at the time in Naif building, just one small building in the premises, did not provide them food, water, and medication. At some point, they kicked out the accompanying family members of the patients. 2 of these patients were children, Rafif and Rafik Tourmosh, 2 kids aged 15 and 16, were just there with no family member, no food, no water. They were both amputees. They were there because their house was bombed and their mother died. And they were just there for 2 weeks in horrible conditions. And whatever we tried to do to get them evacuated, the evacuation got denied day after day. So the Israeli military was raiding the hospital and holding these people captive for 2 weeks in these horrible conditions. So this is a raid. This is the first aspect of attacking institutions, attacking infrastructure. The second one is attacking medical workers. More than 1,700 medical workers were murdered, were killed in Gaza during the genocide. More than 300 more were detained. These people cannot work. They cannot serve their people. They cannot care for their people in the time that they are most needed. These are almost 10% of the healthcare workforce in Gaza that were either killed or detained. We can talk about the detention and the torture in detentions, but also it's important to understand that also the leaders of this system were killed and detained. Dr. Adnan El-Bush, the most important orthopedist in Gaza, were killed in detention. Mohammed Abu Salmiya, the director of the Shifa Hospital, was detained. Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, the director of Kamal Adwan Hospital, was detained and still is. We're hoping now that he will be included in this deal and released. So these are the leaders of this system that could not operate. You could also think about the future, right? Because you can get medication in, you can get maybe equipment in, but training 2,000 doctors or 2,000 doctors and medical workers who are missing now, this will take years, and this will affect the health of Palestinians for many years to come. The third aspect is blocking aid. Medication could not come in, equipment could not come in. Doctors are talking about the very basic idea of not knowing what will come and when it will come. So you don't even know if you should use the same gloves on the second patient or the third patient, because you don't know if the gloves are coming in the next truck or not. The very basic idea of restocking hospital, which should be something we all agree on. Hospitals should be operating and should have stocks, was never an option in the past 2 years. And then the fourth aspect of that is, I referred to that earlier, the blocking of medical evacuation. So treatments are not available, hospitals are being raided, doctors are dying, are killed, and then thousands of people in Gaza could not get the treatment they needed. And Israel blocked their evacuation. Thousands and thousands of people. In some point, the estimation that was that 25,000 people were waiting for urgent evacuation. According to the WHO numbers, 15,000 were on the list just waiting. You need to understand that just to be on the WHO list, you need to see a doctor, which is something that it's not possible for many Gazans during the genocide. Then that doctor needs to report that you need to be evacuated to the Ministry of Health. They need to report to the WHO, and then you're on that list. But still doesn't help you to be on that list. At least we know the recent number I have is from almost a year ago, basically, that more than 600 people just died waiting for medical evacuation. And here, there's a very immediate solution for thousands of them, and that is just opening a corridor from Gaza to the West Bank and Jerusalem. Hospitals are waiting to receive these patients. Israel is just not allowing that movement. And the fifth is what we in medical anthropology call social determinants of health. The destruction of schools, of family structures, of being displaced again and again and again, of living in IDP camps with no clean water, no sewage systems. This has effect on health that is just, in many ways, even more than what every other aspect of care we just talked about.
With Kristóf, we talked about this. It seemed to us that the destruction is obviously terribly affecting what the Gazans living on a day-to-day basis. But at the same time, there is almost like a future-oriented calculation behind it, in the sense that so many vital infrastructures are so powerfully destroyed. Some IVF clinics, for example, were also bombed. Or we didn't really talk about this, but like one of the world's renowned experts on starvation and famine, I think Alex Daval, has recently written this article in Jewish Currents that, the famine, yes, hundreds, maybe thousands of people lose their lives, but the material and emotional effects of a famine basically is transmitted through generations. So in that respect, I guess, maybe the Israeli destruction is not only about kind of destroying, eliminating anything and everything that is on the ground at that very moment, but it actually really wants to implement this long-term, I guess, distraction and crippling of, life in Gaza, I suppose. Would you agree?
Yeah, definitely. I think that what we when people, genocide experts and others, always kind of try to figure is the idea of intent. And when you look at this kind of genocide, the medical genocide, the genocide that is being committed through the attack on conditions of life, the intent is just there. It's not coincidentally that you attack 33 of the 36 hospitals. It's not a coincidence that you kill so many medical workers and detain them. It's not a coincidence that you starve an entire population, denying them of the very basic means to survive. So that's one thing, the intent. And the other thing is, when we look at the attack on healthcare, we see that it has effect over space and time that is different from just bombs, not just, but different from bombs. When you destroy a hospital, it doesn't only affect the patients and the staff members in the hospital. It affects entire communities that depend on that hospital to survive. So, for example, when Kamal Adwan Hospital was put out of operation in December 2024, 70,000 people who were still at the northern side of Gaza at that time were denied all access to healthcare. And this relates to what we've seen in Syria and other places. People don't necessarily leave if there's not enough food or not enough water. They can find something. They want to stay with their family members who cannot move, maybe. But when there's no healthcare, when a family member needs a doctor or needs attention and there's nothing available, then you move. You have to move. And that's a very effective tool of cleansing entire areas. And the other aspect is time. This is a genocide that is, some argued, it's not a genocide because look how slowly they kill Palestinians. They could kill them much faster. So you can see that in terms of time frame of this genocide, you kill them slower with this attack on conditions of life, but the ramifications to the future are for years and generations to come, as you just said. So this, even now that we are seeing this so-called ceasefire, people are going to keep dying because there is no healthcare, there is no proper food and medications, there is no clean water. I mean, the genocide didn't end, and I'm not even sure when we could put a moment in time where it ended, or we are past that.
I mean, at this point, I have to ask you to comment on this, quite obvious effort on behalf of Israeli politicians to claim that the attacks on hospitals were due to Hamas hiding in these facilities. Even in one case, as far as I remember, having one of its headquarters under these facilities. Could you comment on that?
First of all, this is a claim that Israel is pushing for since 2008. So we have been hearing that from what was called Cast-led, the attack on Gaza in 2008, 2009. Then there was the first time we've seen this claim that Shifa is basically a command center of Hamas. And then this claim has been used very intensely in this during the genocide. The spokesperson of the Israeli military presented this animation of Shifa Hospital and how many tunnels are underneath and the rooms and how they fire rockets from command centers under the hospital. There's a good reason why they do so, because according to international law, a hospital loses its protection only when it is used as a mean to attack the opponent. Right? It's not enough to say there is a Hamas person in the hospital as a patient or even just hiding there. It doesn't cause the hospital to lose protection. It has to have a role in attacking the opponent. And then Israel raided Shifa twice, had control over the entire premises. If you now, I always, when I talk to people, I show them this animation that the Israeli spokesperson showed in 27th of October 2023, with different wings and departments, and this is where there's a command center for that wing of Hamas. This is, and then they showed nothing. They showed nothing. They showed one tunnel with 2 rooms of 2 meters by 2 meters, and they allowed just 2 reporters in, 2 international reporters in. Then they destroyed it. And that's in the case that they have something. In all the other 33 hospitals, we've been hearing these arguments in 27 out of the 36 hospitals. Israel claimed for 27 out of 36 hospitals that they are used by Hamas. But then the evidence is very thin. And then you need to consider what's the proportionality. According to international law, if a hospital is used as a command center or for military use, then you need to warn the hospital that it is being used as such, then the hospital needs to have an opportunity to stop acting as such. So you cannot just attack the hospital. You have to allow them time to get the competence out of the hospital and stop using the hospital, for example. And then also then you only can attack specific areas of the hospital where you suspect that there's command centers. This wing or the other department, you cannot take over an entire hospital or an entire system, a healthcare system, with this very thin evidence. And again, Israel now has all the opportunity in the world to show the evidence for the claims that they have been giving, they're being saying for so long. It really is, for me, it sounds like the U.S. claim that there are weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. They said so, and then they said, oh, well, there wasn't any. But you need to show the evidence, and you cannot continue selling that argument to the entire world that buys that every time I'm interviewed in every media, international media, everywhere. Still, this argument by Israel is somehow playing a role when we all know it's a charade. That argument has no basis enough, definitely, in order to justify an attack on an entire healthcare system.
Yeah, well, the argument was made so pervasively that the effect is that we're also forced to bring this into the discussion.
It's good that you asked, because otherwise some of the listeners will say, oh, they didn't address that. I know that. I've been experiencing that for so long. But really, what we need to consider when thinking of other conflicts, how far can that go? And in terms of also, why do we trust these claims by a military that commits a genocide, that has shown disrespect of international law systematically? But still, I have to tell you, because this genocide, it's absurd. No one thought, I don't know, maybe some people thought, I could never think that it will last for 2 years. I thought governments, the US government, the European governments will make Israel stop. But it's somehow this argument kept being used, and effectively, in order for them to continue the genocide. And that's what's so sad about it. That's for the victims, the Gazan people who were exterminated because of these false accusations. But also, like you said in the beginning, for every hospital, every medical facility, every medical worker in the world working in context of conflict, they're not protected. And they know they're not protected. And who can argue now that the principle of protection of healthcare and healthcare facilities is something that the EU can stand behind? The EU has done nothing. Why would anyone anywhere in the world would believe that this is something that's going to protect healthcare?
Can I finally ask maybe something about being on the front lines of all this, in the midst of this genocide? Like, I don't know how to pose this question, I guess, but do you feel like, this is what your work is in vain? Or do you kind of sometimes get the impression that, okay, your documentation, your mobile clinics, your, involvements, they actually make some incremental changes? Or has that changed since October 7, like your feelings about your own work and your organization's work?
It's hard to say. From one aspect, we feel like our work is more important than ever, because we're dealing with just atrocities in scale we have never been dealing with. But then we feel like we can't stop it. This is our day-to-day experience of like just seeing these things in front of our eyes. We're now going to publish a report on the death in incarceration facilities in Israel. We identified 94 detainees who died in the past 2 years in Israeli facilities. And we've been working on that from day one. And it was clear that if there is no oversight, the ICRC is not getting access, the International Committee of the Red Cross is not getting access to Israeli prisons and detention centers. High court judges are not paying visits. Our lawyers and our doctors are not allowed in. People are going to keep dying. And we see that in front of our eyes. And we submitted petitions. We worked, we've done a lot of advocacy. We couldn't get anything to move. I mean, just getting the ICRC in, which is the most basic requirement. The petition we submitted to the High Court was delayed more than 19 times. Really, I stopped counting after the 19th time it was delayed. So the court just allow that disaster to go on, of people held in a facility, being tortured, being denied medical care, and just dying there in dozens. But then you also see that people care, and people care because people care around the world about our work. Our report on, for example, on the detention of medical workers has done a lot of effect in terms of the demonstrations and struggle against the Israeli genocide. When the British government announced that they're not going to allow more, they're going to freeze weapons deals with Israel. So one of the items was the torture in detention facilities, for example. So you see that our work is being read, it is doing something, but then you wake up the next day and you see the numbers. 70 Gazans died today, 80 Gazans died today, 6 kids died of starvation. It's this kind of world that I think we are all experiencing. I'm not sure even how we are digesting it personally as people in the front lines, as you said. But also we are not in the front lines. That's part of what we kind of continue to feel like. We're not those. I mean, in the front lines are the medical workers in Nasser Hospital in Khan Younis who are being bombed. Their families are being bombed. Their families are being uprooted from one area of Gaza to the other, but they still continue working in the hospital in just unimaginable conditions.
But I mean, you are on the front line in another sense, not on the medical front lines, because those are, as you said, the doctors in Gaza and I guess the West Bank as well. But on the front lines in the sense of trying to defend, like basic rights for detainees, but also, people's medical needs. So looking forward, do you see a chance that your organization could support a process of reckoning within Israel or coming to terms, dealing with, I don't know what the right words are, with what happened?
No. That's the short answer. And that's because the 3 main issues that are now at stake are freedom for Palestinians, rebuilding, and accountability. And none of these 3 have any presence in Trump's plan. The plan, or kind of any kind of peace that people are now just floating, is not about Palestinian freedom. It's not going to even advance us a bit into the freedom of Palestinians. The rebuilding seems more like real estate deals that people are going to make a lot of money on the back of Palestinians without allowing Palestinians to rebuild their own society, leading this rebuilding, their somehow go back to life. And accountability. I think that the part of the complicity we've been seeing in the past 2 years we're going to see the implications of that now. Governments, leaders, they're all complicit. It's their interest. It's in their interest to move forward, not look back, and not deal with the crimes that are being done, not deal with the justice that the victims are deserve. But also, frankly, I don't think we'll be able to operate. We are already under attack by the Israeli government since this government was elected in 2022. But there's legislation that is supposed to tax our funding from what they call as foreign entities, which is the UN, the EU governments, by 80%. So this is basically a death blow to the entire field of human rights organizations based here in Israel. The human rights based in Palestine are outlawed, designated as terrorist organizations, and are now also, the Trump administration also designated them for sanctions. The international organizations are not, there's a new registration law that Israel implemented, that they cannot operate fully in Gaza now to even collect the information and the evidence on the ground. So they're shutting down the internationals, the Palestinians, us Israelis, Israeli organizations, and I don't see how I hope, and we're still going to do whatever we can, but the reality is that this sort of peace deal is going to allow Netanyahu's government enough room to continue their judicial overhaul and their attack inside Israeli society, Israeli politics, to consolidate authoritarian control.
Yeah, for the record, everything you just mentioned, from the foreign agents law to the registration of organizations that do not share the goals of people in power, that's been tested and tried in places like Hungary and Turkey, and Russia, and we could go on. So it's unfortunately part of the repertoire now. Erdem, is there still something we should ask?
So my sense is that your organization was established also as a reaction to the complicity of the mainstream Israeli medical institutions, I suppose, or maybe their silence, or maybe their direct involvement in the occupation and some of the crimes committed by the IDF. Could you kind of give us a broad description of, like, in what ways the Israeli medical establishment or Israeli doctors and medical institutions get involved in the activities of the IDF and the occupation in general?
So what, as I said before, the ability to commit genocide is definitely connected to a support from society. And what we've been seeing in the medical community, in the medical establishment, the Israeli medical establishment, is that they're complicit in this genocide in many different ways, and most directly in ethical violations of medical ethics. The Minister of Health announced very early on that Israeli hospitals will not admit Palestinian detainees and hospitalize them and care for them, which is a clear violation of medical ethics. But then you can say he's a minister, maybe he's a politician, but then two directors of the two most important hospitals in Israel, Hadassah and Sheba, these are hospitals that are respected worldwide. Sheba was just elected one of the 10 best hospitals in the world. And the directors of these hospitals also announced that they are not going to admit Palestinian detainees in their hospitals. There are also more on the ground medical ethics violation that's important to acknowledge. A substandard treatment that Palestinian detainees got in Israeli hospitals. We have whistleblowers in these hospitals describing early release of patients, not administering painkillers to Palestinian detainees, releasing of tortured Palestinian detainees back to the institutions where they were tortured. There was a Palestinian detainee who was sexually abused. It became famous because also there were leaked videos of that case. And then he was hospitalized in a Israeli civilian hospital, only to be released 3 days afterwards with very partial treatment back to the facility where he was tortured, where his torture was still there serving. Shackling in 4 limbs of basically all Palestinian detainees during the past 2 years. Not notifying their families. A hospital's most basic obligation to a patient is notifying the family this person is now hospitalized, just that you know that, right? So they're not doing that. They haven't done that for Palestinian detainees. And then there are doctors, Israeli doctors, who clearly, explicitly called for the attack on Palestinian hospitals. There was a petition signed by 80 doctors. Some of their senior doctors, I have friends who are some of the signees are the directors or teachers in advanced studies programs for doctors. They're signed on that. None of them were disciplined for that, for this clearly absurd call to attack hospitals by doctors. And very importantly, the censorship and witch hunting of Palestinian doctors in the Israeli system. Doctors who posted online empathy to the children of Gaza, or the most basic comments on the genocide, just saying the word genocide, were fired, were disciplined. There became this culture of snitching on people. People were looking into their colleagues' social media and then reporting to the administration that someone said that the children of Gaza deserve lives or something like that, and that person would be disciplined. I know personally people who got fired. We are about to publish a report on that. It will take a few more months until it's out. And then the IMA, the Israeli Medical Association, has done nothing to support these people, has done nothing to investigate ethical violations that are being acted by Israeli doctors, members of the IMA. The head of the ethics bureau of the IMA, Dr. Yosef Wolfish, visited Det Iman, the notorious Det Iman facility, where there was a field hospital where the entire operation of this facility is a violation of medical ethics, visited this facility and then published in an Israeli website that he witnessed the most moral and dedicated doctors he's ever seen. Of course, sounds exactly like the IDF is the most moral military in the world. There was full recruitment by this system to do propaganda for Israel in international platforms and to support the genocide on the ground. If our listeners want to read more about that, we published an article at the New York Review of Books. It's titled "The Shame of Israeli Medicine," where a lot of these violations are mentioned there.
We'll provide the links.
Yes.
In any case.
We will. Thanks so much.
So that's it from us for today. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
We would like to thank our contributors, music and mastering Shai Levi, artwork and graphics Polina Georgescu, editing Vera Jonas, and our in-house communications advisor Anna Szilágyi.